Well, having reliable and affordable power is one of those must-haves for pretty much everybody, especially for those of us who are returning from diaspora, who in many, many cases are accustomed to having reliable power most of the time. The affordable part is a different story because especially where I live in the US, power can be very expensive either in the middle of the summer or in the winter, depending on where one lives. For example, if you live in one of these colder places that and you use electricity to heat your house, yes, your electric bill could be something else. Or if you live in these super hot areas, in the summers, the electric bill can be really, really high. And so, yes, while our power is mostly reliable, the affordability question is slightly different. Now, the reliability too also depends on weather. Whenever our weather goes down, we lose power too. That's one thing that many folks outside the US may not realize. Well, welcome to Karateng. We are in the middle of Kisumu City, which is an amazing, amazing, beautiful city in the western part of Kenya. We are spending this morning with some technicians I have on the ground who, this gentleman right here, is coming to install outdoor solar lights. And I'm doing this to delink the solar system within the house with the security lights. That way I can have independent solar lights outside. So he's replacing almost 6 or 7 security lights out there. So while we do that, in this video, I'm going to talk about how we went about ditching Kenya Power or going off-grid, essentially. Many people have been asking me so many questions about solar power, and I'm hoping that in this video, I will be able to get to as many of those questions as possible. But first, let me share a few contextual information that may be useful to some of our viewers who are not familiar with Kenya or who are not Kenyans. So first, Kenya in general, I think pretty much the entire country is served by one power company in terms of distribution of power. They call themselves Kenya Power and Lighting Company. In short, we call them KPLC. And they essentially run a monopoly. And this has really, really been a terrible thing for us in many respects, and I'll explain what that looks like. But in general, though, in Kenya, power is relatively reliable, especially when you compare Kenya to other African countries. Our power, for the most part, is very reliable, especially for people who live in cities. And of course, because they run a monopoly, sometimes things go wrong, and when they do, unfortunately, it can happen to the entire country. So there's been times when the entire country virtually loses power. And I remember one time my brothers missed a flight because the entire country lost power, and there was no backup power system for our local small airport. So things like that can happen. But overall, a vast majority of Kenyans are connected to the national grid, which if you look at East African countries, I think Kenya probably ranks number 1 in terms of the extent to which people are connected to the national grid. And most of this power is generated through hydroelectric power, which is great environmentally, but it can also mean that during droughts, then you may have issues with enough supply. But it's been a while since the country went through severe drought that impacted the supply of power. But unfortunately, though, for many, many reasons, some of which I do not know, the single power distribution company does a lot of subcontracting. As you can imagine, they probably don't have the capacity to serve everyone out in the country. And now, because of that, there's so much space for a lot of middlemen and brokers. Many of them are not necessarily business people, just folks coming in to make quick money and take off. And sometimes it's really hard to tell the distinction between legitimate Kenya Power employees versus brokers in between who are not legitimate, especially because a lot of these brokers work in collaboration with Kenya Power staff. So this is what it has meant for us. At our home right here in Karateng, oh, by the way, we've got lots of avocados here. In our home, when we started building a few years back, we were able to get into the house within about 11 months. Our house was far, far from complete. In fact, at the time, the only thing we cared to have was just a roof over our head, windows, one functioning toilet, and maybe some paint over here. And we had just gotten connections from Kenya Power. And so, in terms of the process, my late brother was the one who was handling all of that. But if you go to the Kenya Power website, they simply say you need to just go apply, you get a quote from them, and then you work on consent from your neighbors. Because surprisingly in Kenya, if you're extending a line to your home, you need to talk to the person who had the last line, and possibly the folks whose land might be impacted by the additional line. And so, unfortunately, this process can be very painful depending on the kind of neighbors that you have. Some neighbors are really nice, they don't mind, they simply say, hey, go ahead and connect power. Other neighbors will be like, no, you can't connect power from quote unquote my line, or you can't have any power lines crisscrossing around the boundaries of my line. So it just depends on the neighbors you have. So once you get consent and you pay for it, then the company comes and they construct and they supply with the power. It sounds very straightforward, but it's not always the case. The main issue is that, for one, once you apply for power, it sounds like there's a purposeful delay in the process. Sometimes you have like missing applications or missing records of payment, or this is really, really famous. They give you an absolutely wild quote. For instance, one of my neighbors was just extending a line that needed just one pole. And what they asked her to pay was almost 6 times higher than what they asked the next neighbor who needed actually 3 poles. And so some of their quotes are hard to tell how legitimate they are. But it seems like there's a process that is created to frustrate customers. And this process, to me, sounds like it's designed to force customers to go and speak to Kenya Power employees, quote unquote, offline. And that often means you have to go talk to somebody, ask for help for a problem that they have created. And it often means that on the side, they're going to ask you to pay for stuff, and then you're paying people, and it's just constant payment until you eventually get power. And even when you do so, there is no guarantee that the work that you receive is legitimate. And that has happened to many of my folks, happened to us too. We applied, paid, did everything only to find out that the meter that they installed for us, quote unquote, belonged to somebody else. And I don't know whether that's another language they use, but whether you pay or not, I mean, regardless of the method you use, there is no guarantee that your eventual line will be legitimate. And so I had a case where one of my friends, they just came to his home, cut the lines, literally chopped the power poles into pieces and destroyed everything, telling him that he had an illegitimate line, when he had simply gone, applied the right way, did everything correctly. So many of these things happen to a lot of Kenya Power customers. Now, besides all those wild things, sometimes then you have issues of blackout, which again, depending on where you are, in some cases it's an issue, in other cases it's not. Like where we live in Kateng, it's not a major issue, but once in a while you get blackouts. The problem with that, of course, is when you lose power, then every system goes down, whether it's your fans, whether it's your CCTV, internet, and things like that. And it's very challenging for kids who live in diaspora. Now, the other main issue besides blackouts is the issue of the cost of power. I was told one of the mistakes I made was to buy power tokens worth 10,000 shillings. So after doing that the first time, the system sort of realizes that then they need to be charging you more. So on days that I would buy like a token worth 2,000, it would barely last. And so the power tokens can be really wild. One of my friends who lives out west, he lives in the US, there's no one that lives in the house, but he gets a bill of 50,000 a month for a home that nobody uses power. So the way they bill customers is really wild and exceptionally annoying. And sometimes when you get the technicians to come in, it's just more money, more problems. Like this summer, I was actually forced to buy a meter twice apparently the first group made a mistake and then I had to pay. So their systems are really wild. So these are the problems that forced us to consider solar options. So the kind of system we're currently using at our home is a 5 kVA system, which is our primary source of power. So the Kenya Power one is just a backup, but our primary option is the 5 kVA system. We have about 8 gel batteries, 12 550 watt panels, and we have an inverter. So it basically powers everything in our house, whether it's lighting, the fridges, the microwave, dispenser, caretaker house, chicken house, all security lights, all water pumps, and the electric fans. And usually it's not a problem. Things work out just fine for the most part. We've not had an issue, except that this system has limitations. For one, we are not able to weld with the system. So if we want to do welding, that's when we have to switch to the national grid to do welding. And then secondly, we are not supposed to use any water heating systems with it because the batteries are not designed for that. And then of course, the batteries are not expected to last more than 7 years. So at some point, depending on how much they are used, we will definitely need to buy new batteries sooner or later. But because we are gone most of the times, I'm hoping they'll last a little longer. And then our system as is does not have smart features. And that means I cannot monitor usage from my phone. I would need to install something else that will allow me to monitor how much we're using it so that we are using it in a smart way. And then, of course, unfortunately, with this system, especially the smaller batteries, is that when you have multiple days without proper sun, then the power goes down. And so I've had a few instances where I lose solar power and then I have to switch to Kenya Power. And so to mitigate these problems, I've done a few things, and there are some things that we are still going to do. The first thing is that recently we separated all security lights from the internal system. So like you saw the gentleman who is helping me, we are installing independent security lights outside the house that are not connected to the solar power within the house. So what that means is that the entire night we are not using batteries to power our security lights. And that has helped massively with just managing power. And then of course, one of the things we've done too is to delink the caretaker house outlets from the main system, because we realize that the folks that sometimes help us and live in the caretaker house are the ones who sometimes use heating elements. So our solar system as is only works for the lighting system for the caretaker house and not the outlets. And then of course, our plan moving forward is to install lithium ion batteries, which last longer and allows us to do a whole lot more. So here are some of the things that I've learned that may help folks who are thinking about solar power at the moment. So number one, be sure to use reputable folks, especially using folks that have been referred. But even when you are referred, sometimes solar companies like to upsell folks on things. Like for example, one of my relatives only needed 6 panels, but they were asking him to install anywhere between 12 and 16 panels when his home is in a place where he does not need as many panels. So be watchful for things that may be sold to you that are not necessary. And of course, when you are bringing in your solar guy, make sure they're working very closely with your electrician, because the solar guy may not know how the system was designed. And then of course, be sure to separate the security lights from the interior lights. And then if at all possible, please buy lithium ion batteries. I know they are way more expensive, but be sure to use lithium ion. And then if you can, use a smart system that allows you to monitor and manage your power use. And of course, be sure to design the solar system much earlier on so that it should not be an afterthought at the end of it. So overall, if you ask me how much we spent about 900,000 in the initial installation. So I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next. Thank you.